It all started with me, 52M, about 6 months ago when my new neighbors moved in next door. They seemed nice enough at first, a young couple, John, 37M, and Elena, 35F, with 2 kids and a dog. We exchanged pleasantries over the fence and even had them over for a barbecue shortly after they arrived. Everything was going great until their dog started using my garden as its personal toilet. Now, I've lived in this house for over 15 years. It was the first home I bought after getting married, and though my wife passed away 5 years ago, I've stayed here because of the memories we shared. The garden was her pride and joy, and I've maintained it in her honor ever since. It's not just a patch of grass to me. It's a living memorial to the love of my life. I'm not unreasonable when it comes to neighborhood issues. I understand that accidents happen, especially with pets. The first couple of times I noticed dog poop in my garden, I didn't think much of it. I figured maybe the dog had gotten loose or the owners hadn't noticed. But as the weeks went by, it became clear this was a regular occurrence. I decided to approach my neighbors about it. I knocked on their door one Saturday morning and politely explained the situation. Elena answered and seemed genuinely apologetic. She promised they'd keep a closer eye on their dog, Max, and make sure he didn't get into my yard anymore. We chatted for a bit, and she mentioned they'd moved here from the city for a quieter life. I thought I understood. After all, I'd done the same thing years ago with my late wife. For a while, things improved. But after about a week, I started finding poop in my garden again. This time, I was a bit more frustrated. I spent a lot of time and effort maintaining my garden and constantly having to clean up after someone else's dog was getting old fast. It wasn't just about the inconvenience. Every time I had to clean up after Max, it felt like a small desecration of the space I shared with my wife. I went over to talk to them again, this time catching John as he was leaving for work. He seemed less understanding than Elena had been. He mumbled something about how it was just a bit of dog poop, and I was making a big deal out of nothing. I tried to explain how it was affecting my garden and what the garden meant to me, but he just waved me off and drove away. His dismissive attitude reminded me of my own father, who never took my concerns seriously when I was growing up. It hit a nerve I didn't even know I had. At this point, I was getting pretty annoyed. I decided to install a small fence around my garden to keep Max out. It wasn't anything fancy, just a simple wooden fence about 3 feet high. I thought this would solve the problem once and for all. As I was putting it up, I remembered how my wife and I had talked about doing this years ago, but never got around to it. It felt bittersweet to finally be doing it without her. Boy, was I wrong about the fence solving the problem. A few days after putting it up, I came home from work to find it knocked over and, you guessed it, more dog poop in my garden. I was furious. I stormed over to my neighbor's house and rang the doorbell repeatedly until John answered. I'll admit, I lost my cool a bit. I started yelling about how inconsiderate they were being and how I was sick of cleaning up after their dog. I told him about my wife, about what the garden meant to me, and how his lack of respect was like trampling on her memory. John yelled back, saying I was being a terrible neighbor and that if I didn't like living next to dogs, I should move to a retirement community. His words stung. I'm only in my early 50s, and the implication that I was too old or set in my ways to live in a family neighborhood felt like a slap in the face. Our argument attracted the attention of other neighbors. Mrs. Thompson, 78F, from across the street, came out to see what all the commotion was about. She's lived in the neighborhood for over 40 years and is kind of the unofficial peacekeeper. She tried to calm us both down, but by that point, we were both too angry to listen. Mrs. Thompson later told me that she'd never seen 2 grown men act so childishly, which made me feel ashamed, but also more determined to stand my ground. The next day, I woke up to find my car covered in toilet paper. I couldn't prove it was John or his family, but I had my suspicions. In retaliation, I may have accidentally on purpose let my sprinklers run a bit longer than usual, soaking their yard and the pile of Amazon packages on their porch. As I watched the water soak their lawn, I felt a mix of satisfaction and guilt. This wasn't who I was. My wife would have been disappointed to see me acting this way. Things escalated quickly from there. Over the next few weeks, it seemed like the whole neighborhood got involved. Some people sided with me, agreeing that John and Elena needed to control their dog better. Others thought I was overreacting and should just let it go. The Johnsons next door, who I've known for over a decade, surprised me by siding with John and Elena. They said I'd changed since my wife died, become more irritable and less friendly. Their words hurt more than I cared to admit. Mrs. Thompson tried to organize a neighborhood meeting to discuss the issue, but it quickly transferred into a shouting match. people. We're bringing up old grudges that had nothing to do with the current situation. Did you know that apparently 10 years ago, Bob, 63M, from 2 doors down, had a tree that dropped leaves in Janet's 61F pool? Because that somehow became relevant to the great dog poop debate. I sat there, watching my neighbors argue, feeling like I was watching the community I'd been a part of for so long fall apart. The neighborhood has essentially split into 2 factions now. There's Team No Poop, which supports my right to a dog waste-free garden, and Team Let Dogs Be Dogs, which thinks I'm being unreasonable. It's like being back in high school, with cliques and whispered conversations that stop when you walk by. I've started avoiding the local coffee shop because I can feel the stares and hear the whispers when I walk in. I never wanted it to get this far. All I wanted was to be able to enjoy my garden without having to watch where I step. Now I've got neighbors who won't even make eye contact with me when we pass on the street, and I'm pretty sure someone signed me up for a bunch of spam mailing lists because my mailbox is constantly full of junk mail. The other day, I found myself sitting in my garden, looking at the flower beds my wife and I had planted together. Instead of feeling the usual sense of peace and connection to her, all I could feel was anger and frustration. It hit me then how much this situation had tainted something that was so precious to me. I've tried talking to John and Elena multiple times, but they either ignore me or tell me to mind my own business. I've thought about calling animal control, but I'm worried that would just make things worse. Part of me wonders if I'm overreacting, if maybe I'm channeling my grief over losing my wife into this conflict. But another part of me feels like, if I back down now, I'm letting go of one of the last connections I have to her. So, Reddit, what do I do? How do I resolve this situation without completely destroying my relationship with my neighbors? Is there a way to get them to understand my perspective, or am I fighting a losing battle here? How do I honor my wife's memory without turning into the neighborhood grouch she would have hated to see me become? Update 1. It's been about a month since my original post, and I wish I could say things have gotten better, but unfortunately they've only gotten worse. First, let me address some of the questions and suggestions from my original post. Many of you suggested setting up cameras to catch Max in the act. I did install a couple of security cameras around my property. They didn't catch Max, but they did catch something else I'll get to in a bit. Installing those. Cameras brought back memories of when my wife and I first moved in. We were so paranoid about living in a new neighborhood that we installed a security system. We never needed it, and we used to laugh about how silly we'd been. Now here I was, 15 years later, feeling that same paranoia all over again. Others suggested trying to talk to Elena again, thinking she might be more reasonable than John. I took that advice and tried to catch her one afternoon when she was getting home from work. It didn't go well. She accused me of harassing her family and threatened to get a restraining order if I didn't leave them alone. I was shocked. This was the same woman who had been so apologetic just a few months ago. As I walked back to my house, I couldn't help but wonder what John had been telling her about me. Had he painted me as some sort of neighborhood monster? Now, on to the new developments. About a week after my last post, I noticed something odd. The dog poop in my garden seemed different. It was larger than Max's usual deposits. I brushed it off at first, thinking maybe they had gotten a bigger dog or Max had eaten something that disagreed with him. But something about it nagged at me. I found myself examining dog poop like some sort of amateur detective, which is definitely not how I imagined spending my retirement years. But then I caught sight of something on my security cameras that made my blood boil. It wasn't Max using my garden as a toilet, it was John. That's right, my adult neighbor was deliberately pooping in my garden in the middle of the night. I sat there, staring at my computer screen in disbelief, watching this grown man squat in my beloved garden. I felt a mix of fury and disgust that I've never experienced before. I was furious and disgusted. I confronted John with the video evidence, thinking surely this would be the end of it. He'd be embarrassed, apologize, and we could finally put this whole mess behind us. I even rehearsed what I was going to say, trying to find a way to approach this bizarre situation with some dignity. Nope. Instead, John laughed in my face. He said it served me right for being such a pain about a little dog poop. When I threatened to show the video to the police, he said go ahead. It would just prove how crazy I was for installing cameras to spy on my neighbors. His reaction left me speechless. I couldn't understand how someone could be so deliberately cruel and then act like I was the unreasonable one. I was at a loss. I did end up going to the police, but they said that while John's behavior was disgusting, it wasn't technically illegal as long as he wasn't trespassing. They suggested I put up no trespassing signs and document any further incidents. I left the police station feeling defeated and foolish. I couldn't help but think about what my wife would say if she could see me now, reporting my neighbor to the police for pooping in our garden. She always had a great sense of humor. I'm sure she would have found some way to laugh about this absurd situation. Meanwhile, the neighborhood divide has gotten even deeper. Someone, I suspect one of John's supporters, has started a rumor that I had tried to poison their dog. It's completely untrue. I would never harm an animal, no matter how frustrated I was with its owners. But now I'm getting dirty looks from people who used to be friendly, and I overheard someone at the local coffee shop referring to me as that dog killer from Maple Street. The accusation hit me hard. I've always been an animal lover. My wife and I used to volunteer at the local animal shelter before she got sick. The idea that people could think I would hurt an innocent animal made me feel sick to my stomach. Mrs. Thompson, bless her heart, is still trying to mediate. She organized another neighborhood meeting, this time at the local community center instead of someone's home. It went marginally better than the last one, in that no one stormed out or threw punches, but we're still far from a resolution. Sitting in that community center, I was struck by how much had changed. This was the same place where we used to have neighborhood potlucks and holiday parties. Now it felt more like a battlefield, with each side eyeing the other suspiciously. The meeting did reveal some interesting background, though. Apparently, John and Elena have a history of neighbor disputes. They lived in an apartment before moving here, and their previous landlord attended the meeting to share how they had numerous complaints about noise and pet issues. As I listened to the landlord speak, I couldn't help but feel a mix of vindication and sadness. On one hand, it proved that I wasn't crazy or overreacting. On the other hand, it made me wonder why John and Elena were so resistant to being good neighbors. What had happened in their lives to make them so inconsiderate of others? This information split the neighborhood even further. Some people saw it as proof that John and Elena were the problem, while others accused their former landlord of harassment and spreading lies. I sat there, watching my once peaceful neighborhood tear itself apart, and felt a deep sense of guilt. Had my insistence on protecting my garden been worth all this strife? I'm starting to wonder if moving might be my only option at this point. I love my home, and I've lived here for over a decade, but the stress of this situation is taking a toll on my mental health. Every time I hear a noise outside, I wonder if it's John coming to vandalize my property again. I've started avoiding my front yard entirely, which means my garden, the whole reason this started, is now completely neglected. The thought of leaving the home I shared with my wife breaks my heart, but I'm not sure how much more of this I can take. I'm open to suggestions, Reddit. How do I fix this mess? Is there any way to salvage my relationship with my neighbors, or should I cut my losses and start house hunting? And how do I reconcile my desire for peace with my need to stand up for myself and honor my wife's memory? Update 2. It's been another month, and I'm writing this update from a hotel room. Yes, you read that right. I'm not in my house anymore. Let me explain how things got to this point. After my last update, things continued to escalate. The rumor about me poisoning John and Elena's dog spread like wildfire. I started receiving threatening notes in my mailbox, and someone spray-painted "dog killer" on my garage door. I tried to explain to people that it wasn't true, but it seemed like no one was interested in hearing my side of the story anymore. Every time I stepped outside, I could feel eyes on me, judging me, condemning me for something I didn't do. It reminded me of when my wife was first diagnosed with cancer, and some of our more superstitious neighbors acted like it was contagious. That feeling of isolation and judgment was all too familiar. The final straw came last week. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of breaking glass. Someone had thrown a brick through my living room window with a note attached that read, "How does it feel to be scared in your own home?" The crash jolted me awake, and for a moment, I was disoriented. In my half-awake state, I called out for my wife before remembering she was gone. That realization, coupled with the fear of someone attacking my home, left me shaken to my core. I called the police immediately. They came and took a report, but said there wasn't much they could do without concrete evidence of who did it. They suggested I stay with friends or family for a few days until things calmed down. As I stood there in my pajamas, glass crunching under my slippered feet, I felt utterly alone. This house, which had once been a sanctuary filled with love and happy memories, now felt like a target on my back. I took their advice and packed a bag to stay with my sister. But when I tried to leave, I found that someone had slashed all 4 of my car tires. At this point, I was genuinely afraid for my safety. I called a taxi and checked into this hotel where I've been for the past week. Sitting in this impersonal room, surrounded by bland decor and the faint smell of cleaning products, I can't help but think about how much I miss my home. I miss my garden, I miss my neighbors, the ones who are still talking to me, and most of all, I miss feeling safe. I've been in contact with a lawyer to discuss my options. They've advised me to document everything and said I might have a case for harassment and property damage. But honestly, I'm not sure I have the energy for a lengthy legal battle. The thought of dragging this out even longer, of having to relive every painful moment in a courtroom, makes me feel exhausted. Mrs. Thompson has been keeping me updated on the neighborhood situation. Apparently, my absence has caused quite a stir. Some people think I've fled because I'm guilty, while others are starting to question if things have gone too far. She told me that a few of the neighbors who had been on John and Elena's side are starting to have doubts. They're wondering if maybe they judged me too quickly. It's a small comfort, but at this point, I'll take what I can get. John and Elena, for their part, seem to be reveling in the drama. Mrs. Thompson overheard them at the local pub, laughing about how they'd won and driven me out of the neighborhood. It makes me sick to think that this whole situation, which started over something so small, has resulted in me being forced out of my own home. I keep thinking about how my wife would have handled this. She always had a way of disarming tense situations with her warmth and humor. I wish I had inherited some of that skill from her. I've been doing a lot of thinking over the past week. As much as I hate the idea of leaving my home, I'm starting to think it might be the best option for my mental health and safety. I've contacted a real estate agent to discuss putting my house on the market. The thought of selling the home where I shared so many happy years with my wife feels like a betrayal, but I keep reminding myself that she would want me to be safe and happy, even if that means leaving. Part of me feels like I'm letting John and Elena win if I move. But another part of me just wants this nightmare to be over. I never imagined a dispute over dog poop could spiral so out of control. I find myself lying awake at night, replaying every interaction, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. Could I have been more patient, more understanding, or would it have made any difference at all? I'm not sure what my next steps will be. I need to go back to my house at some point to gather more of my belongings, but I'm honestly scared to do so. My lawyer has advised me to bring a police escort when I do. The idea of needing police protection to enter my own home is surreal. It's like something out of a movie, not something that happens to a retired widower in a quiet suburban neighborhood. This whole experience has really opened my eyes to how quickly a community can turn on one of its own. People I've known and been friendly with for years now look at me like I'm a monster, all because of rumors and misunderstandings. It's made me question everything I thought I knew about my neighbors, about community, about human nature itself. I've started looking at houses in other neighborhoods, even in other towns. Each listing I look at feels like another step away from the life I've known, from the memories I've cherished. But maybe a fresh start is what I need. Maybe in a new place, I can find a way to honor my wife's memory without being haunted by the ghost of what our life used to be. I guess I'm writing this final update as a cautionary tale. Neighbor disputes can escalate quickly, and once the community takes sides, it's hard to come back from that. If I could go back in time, I'd handle things differently. Maybe I'd try harder to befriend John and Elena, or find a compromise earlier on. Or maybe I'd realize sooner that some battles aren't worth fighting, no matter how right you think you are. But hindsight is 20/20, and now I'm left picking up the pieces of my life. I'm not sure what the future holds, but I know it won't be in this neighborhood. Wherever I end up, you can bet I'll be a lot more careful about how I handle disputes with neighbors. As I sit here in this hotel room, looking out at an unfamiliar skyline, I can't help but feel a profound sense of loss, not just for my home or my garden or my place in the community, but for the simple peace I once took for granted. The ability to walk out my front door without fear, to chat with neighbors without suspicion, to simply exist in my own space without conflict. I don't know what tomorrow will bring. I don't know if I'll find a new home that feels as right as my old one did. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust a neighbor again, but I do know that I need to find a way to move forward. For my own sake, and for the sake of the life my wife would have wanted me to live. Thanks for listening to my story, Reddit. If nothing else, I hope it serves as a warning to others to try and resolve neighbor issues peacefully before they spiral out of control. And maybe, Just maybe, it'll remind people to be a little kinder to their neighbors. You never know what battles they might be fighting behind closed doors.